This NDP debate series is brought to you by Business Leadership South Africa.
The National Development Plan is government's economic blueprint designed to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. It emphasizes partnerships between business, government, labour and citizens. This series of debates brought to you by Business Leadership South Africa will attempt to understand the policy and get into the nuts and bolts of where it's succeeding or potentially failing. Today we're discussing infrastructure development needed for large-scale economic growth. I'm joined in studio by Finance Minister of South Africa Nhlanhla Nene, who has just delivered the country's budget for 2015. Also in studio are esteemed business leaders. Welcome one and all. Minister, thank you very much for your time that you've so graciously given today. Let's start with how the budget 2015 was framed by the National Development Plan.
Thank you very much, it is good to get an opportunity to engage with such esteemed key players in our economy. In the interest of time, perhaps let me just indicate that from the day the National Development Plan was adopted as government's blueprint, it was clear that one of our major tasks is to align our budgeting process with the National Development Plan. The National Plan takes us to 2030. Our budgeting process, as we know, is a 3-year budgeting process with a year's budget being part of what we need to pass. But this feeds into the broader medium-term strategic framework, which is a 5-year government plan. So all these require that we ensure that our allocations, our plans, our strategies as we take to Parliament, as we take to the nation, talk directly to the National Development Plan. So it is for that reason that we, today with a particular focus on infrastructure, it is precisely in line with also its injunction that we need to focus on investment rather than our growth being driven by consumption. We also are looking at what the infrastructure has the potential to do is also to crowd in the private sector, in that it is at the center of growing the economy on a sustainable basis and in an inclusive manner.
Also in the interest of time, I'm going to open to our esteemed audience right at the top of this discussion. And Mr. Kieswetter, I'm going to throw it to you because you were present at our first debate on the National Development Plan. And one criticism that we received from the audience is that we were all too polite. There were too many niceties in our discussion. So we want to get a robust discussion going today with the Finance Minister. And Edward, over to you as CEO of Alexander Forbes.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. We can be polite and robust at the same time. We don't have to be impolite being robust. Minister, one of the things obviously central to our infrastructure debate, but also to the broad enabling of growth in our economy, is electricity. One of the things that have been on the plan for probably now almost 2 decades is the whole West Core project. You know, linking, and it is an interregional issue, linking the wonderful capacity at the Congo and to South Africa, but also capacitating the entire region. Surely that must be probably the lowest cost electricity available, yet we don't see much specific progress in that regard. So that's the first point I'd like to know. Where is this in our thinking, in our plan? And then secondly, I think just more generally, what would be nice to hear from you today is how, from your perspective, do you think we as business leaders can help more? Because we seem to be engaged in a lot of talking, but we don't get beyond that in terms of practical, doable things.
Thank you very much. Minister, if you could address those 2 questions, starting with Inga Dam.
Well, the INGA project, as you know, we've already dealt with the treaties part of it. South Africa has already signed into those treaties, as you would know, because if it involves a number of governments, there always will be such challenges in arriving at who does what, who gets what. But we have passed the stage where our governments have actually now signed the treaties. It is indeed now the implementation. And it forms part of a broader infrastructure development program that our president is actually champion of through the PIDA project. We have our development finance institutions like the DBSA already involved in this, and I think some planning work has actually been completed, and we're looking at implementation going forward. Indeed, I agree with Edward that this is one of those that would actually be able to deliver electricity in a cost-effective manner, but it also addresses the connection between the different various countries in the region. It is at an advanced stage, and we are doing everything humanly possible. But you would also recall that we are also focusing on the local and the domestic energy supply side, which has not kept up with the pace at which we would have loved it to go. And it is for that reason that your next question becomes critical as to how can business get involved. And I think this is important. These dialogues need to be stepped up. These dialogues we need to take them to the next level, where we begin to identify those key players and people identifying those impediments to participation. Because business, in my view, has an opportunity both from the financing side of our infrastructure, but also on the implementation side, because the construction industry has actually taken advantage of a number of our infrastructure projects. What we haven't seen is whether what infrastructure by its nature should do of crowding in the private sector. I don't think we have achieved that at an optimal level, because in the past 5 years, we always report that government or state-owned companies have, working with, that's now from just the government coffers, have actually put in excess of R1 trillion into economic infrastructure. And the question is, have we been able to crowd in, not necessarily an equal amount, but a commensurate amount of private sector investment in that space? So we do need these dialogues, and we need them not only in forums like this, but also sitting down. There is the new initiative, which is the presidential working group, where I would want to believe that we would have an opportunity where the private sector would be able to come to the party and also be able to say to government, these are the impediments, so that as government we could address those, but also for government to also indicate to business where we would want the private sector to come in. The energy part is actually has given us a good example. The independent power producers is one of those examples which I always cite, where government working with the private sector, we have actually been able to see some positive outcomes.
We do have some members of the construction fraternity in our audience, and Mr. Chris Gianni, as Construction Industry Development Board Vice Chairman. Perhaps, sir, you would like to weigh in at this stage on construction and what you're seeing, adding to what the Minister has just alluded to in terms of private sector and government working together in the robust construction space?
Yeah. We as a CIDB have really sort of
Chris, can I ask
done
you to stand? I'm sorry.
a survey and of what the involvement of the industry is and what the outlook is there. But having said that, we still have to look at the the realities of whether or not industry itself, because industry itself at the moment is divided. You have the black side of the industry and you have the white side of the industries. Issues such as perhaps even collusion are still haggling this industry. and so on. And I think that yes, the minister is correct in saying that there is that interaction between the between government and the private sector, and I think we're coming together much more closer now with certain initiatives that we are doing. Yeah, I think that ended at that.
Thank you very much for that input. Colin Coleman, if I could move to you at this point, sir, and if you can weigh in with your thoughts on the discussion afoot.
Sure, Minister, thanks very much, and congratulations on your budget. I think the interests of business and government are aligned in trying to get us to get proper implementation and break the bottlenecks, particularly around the energy crisis, the labour crisis, and other things that we've kind of have as self-inflicted wounds and trending below growth. We should be around 3.5% growth rates in the country. We are targeting 2%, and there's lots that we can do to help ourselves to get to 3.5%. So we're all aligned on that. One of the Business Leadership South Africa requests was for members to weigh in on what practically we can do to help the war room at Eskom, the joint effort between Eskom and the government to accelerate improved delivery of energy. And we've done that. Certainly in my case, I made 3 practical suggestions around financing, around new incremental power supply projects at below cost of diesel, which is obviously using up a lot of capacity. The question is often that it's quite opaque, certainly to the public and even to us as business leaders, as to what is actually happening in the war room. So it would be very helpful to get a sense of, for the public and for us, what is actually happening, what are the prospects of breaking the logjam, in the next 6 to 12 months, and how practically, what are the things you want from us to get practical improvement in the situation?
That's an important point that you are making, Colin, because I think government took the decision of establishing the war room after realizing that we have this binding constraint, and we've been receiving, reports, be it from Eskom, be it from the industry and everyone else. We needed to get to the bottom of this, and this is not the first time. And I have undertaken to go back to government to indicate that the private sector wants to come in. In fact, at NEDLAC, it also came up, not only from the private sector but also from labor. Everybody saying, whatever it is, whatever war you are fighting in the war room, unless you invite us to come in, we won't know what your challenges are. And I undertook to take that back to government, because I think it's a critical area of collective effort in order to deal with the challenges that we confront. I think the focus was more on, do we have the resources to do this? Do we actually have the capacity, be it in Eskom? But beyond that, it's not just Eskom, it's the energy. It's not an energy challenge we have. It's not the electricity challenge we have. It's an energy challenge that we have. So we need to look beyond just Eskom, and it is for that reason that we welcome the offers for people to participate in the war room, and it is something that I will take back to government. But I think it's important, and we are making progress, and as you will see, that some of the bottlenecks actually have been dealt with. But I don't think we have resolved all the problems. But the Deputy President has also set up an advisory panel, and I would want to believe that business is actually represented in the panel that advises him. But the full participation in the war room is something that I would want to believe is a welcome commitment.
Before we move off the electricity conversation and infrastructure from that perspective, I'm going to open up to any other burning questions in that arena that need to be addressed. Mr. Kieswetter and Sizwe at the back. Go ahead, sir.
Just thanks. Minister, a very specific question. I noticed in the budget speech and some of the supplementary documentation that government is opening its thinking around equity participation, but one gets the impression it's only incremental energy. Is this not a good time for government to review its position on a strategic equity partner for Eskom? both to bring in technical skills and competencies, but also an injection of capital that would help the funding burden as well.
Yeah, again, I don't think there are any boundaries in making sure that we address the challenge that we're confronted with. But I think, again, as I said earlier, the focus has actually been on returning Eskom to financial sustainability, but also getting Eskom to be able to discharge its responsibility. But beyond that, it is for that reason that we're looking at all other areas of cooperation with the private sector, be it cogeneration, be it the independent power producers. And beyond that, I would want to believe that there would also be considerations of other partnerships, including equity partnership. But it is government's plan to ensure that we actually take this to the next level going forward.
Perhaps another way to phrase that is that the current emergency around Eskom has derailed slightly the longer-term infrastructure development plan. Would that be fair to say?
It has done both derailing us, but it also has brought to the fore some of the challenges and solutions that otherwise we actually hadn't paid attention to. Because, I mean, I would want to believe that the current thinking of working with the private sector has actually not been part of the equation. And we find ourselves in that situation, and I would want to believe that it's one of the good that has come out of the bad.
Sizwe?
Do you perhaps elaborate on government's thinking around shale gas and how that fits into the whole energy setup?
Shale gas has been identified as one of the sources of energy, and as I said earlier, the challenge we're confronted with is not just an electricity challenge, but it's an energy challenge in general. Shale gas is indeed part of the mix, and some work has been done already in the Karoo, but as you would know, feasibility studies and everything else would have to precede the work that needs to go in that space. And it would be interesting also to see how many producers actually are in the running, and because it has actually shown that there is a lot of interest in that space as well. But it's also got its environmental issues that need to be addressed, and a number of things that relate to the feasibility side of it, and whether once policy has also been concluded, because that's the certainty that the private sector would want before they could actually start investing in that space, because the private sector will only go once there is certainty in that space.
Colin, then Judy?
I was just going to briefly say that I think we can make a good crisis out of the energy challenges. Absolutely. And one of the examples to use in relation to the strategic partner question that Ed Kizweta raised is the international interest, particularly from the Sovereign Wealth Fund community, in an asset-based support. In other words, not at the Eskom level, but rather at the asset level, at individual power stations. I think we can raise billions of dollars in relation to minority investments of sovereign wealth funds in those particular assets, which would release significant funding for other purposes.
What's great about this, Minister, before you respond to Coleman, is that it's a forum like this where we're actually formulating a working group and we can come up with positive solutions.
Absolutely.
Shall I go? Yeah. You know, it's about robust discussion, but at the same time we have to contextualize and reflect. And I can't but help reflect that had we gone ahead in 2008 and started the nuclear new build, we'd have been close to switch on. So the question really is around the stop-start. And I think that's part of what causes the paralysis. And then coming from business, my question really is around, Minister, what are the game changers? What are your 3 game changers for the country? Because from a business perspective, when the economy is in a downturn, we have security crisis issues on the continent, we have Ebola, which is still not fixed, having a major impact on one of our low-hanging fruit industries like tourism, which is where I'm sitting now. But really it is around, once we make make a decision to execute, and then the question around your game changers, and what are we going to do around, disruptive innovation. So, what is your thinking?
So let's start there with the three game changers, Minister, from Judy Nokweri, Arriva consultant.
No, formerly Arriva.
Formerly Arriva consultant. My apologies, but that's where the nuclear question came from.
Yeah. Indeed, reflecting on where we would be had we moved much earlier, well, it goes without saying that we would be miles ahead, including the infrastructure built at Eskom. We actually would be. But let me also indicate that between that time and now, this is now the difficulty with limited resources, but also not looking outside of the box, trying to focus on what resources you have and the challenges that you're confronted with. The focus of government on connecting households without building capacity to support that and maintaining that capacity actually also did have an impact in bringing us to where we are. So we should again contextualize what then ensued in the process, because lack of maintenance on our infrastructure, we've actually lost the capacity which is almost equivalent to what Medupi will actually bring on. And that alone says a great deal. And so if we could what we are trying to focus on now is to say, let us take the pain now. It is for that reason that we said to Eskom, they mustn't beat about the bush about load shedding. Let's go into it so that we can also be able to give ourselves space to maintain, whilst we know that it's going to take a bit of time before our first unit delivers, which I'm told yesterday they tested the first 794 megawatts. So there actually has been some positives, but the positives have actually not been able to make up for what we have lost in the process.
After the break, South Africa's Minister of Finance, Nhlanhla Nene. Coming up, South Africa's Minister of Finance, Nhlanhla Nene, talks us through some of the game changers for the country's economy, as well as a closer look at South Africa's energy mix.
The game changers, infrastructure is key. Our investment in infrastructure, it is for that reason that we're saying we need to change the quality and the composition of our expenditure, even in our allocations, that it should focus more on investment rather than our growth being led by consumption. We also have then said we need to take advantage of investing in our cities, because our cities actually have the potential and the capacity to be able to provide us with the momentum to take us to the next level, because as you would know, our cities have the capacity to be able to absorb resources, and we are saying we need to bring in our development finance institutions to be able to create space for the private sector to come in as they support our cities in order to be able to classify infrastructure as an asset class that is calculated in terms of its term, but also so that it is financed through its life, but allow the private sector to enter at the right level. And we've had meetings with city managers. Hopefully they will also be re-looking at their budgets such that we pay particular attention to this one. In addition to the infrastructure, both at the general level, both social and economic infrastructure, but also looking at how our cities are able to deliver on this one. And then beginning to focus on sectors, low energy intensive sectors like agriculture, tourism. That's where resources have actually been deployed. But beginning to look at the role that the SMMEs can play in this place in order to create employment. So the three, focusing mainly on infrastructure, because that infrastructure in creating an environment that is conducive to doing business is putting in incentives like creation of special economic zones, making sure that in those areas we also have these other incentives as part of making sure that we're able to create the necessary employment. Issue of energy is at the top of our agenda, and we cannot overemphasize that.
Phakamani Hadebe, Chief Executive of SA Operations Barclays. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Minister. There has been a sector in South Africa that believes that government spending on infrastructure, that is direct government spending, if you exclude Transnet and Eskom and to a lesser extent DBSA, is not at the level where it should be. What is the Minister's opinion on that?
Look, I think it might be true, Pakamani, but I think what we have not been able to do is for our investment in infrastructure to be catalytic enough to be able to bring in the private sector. Because it would, if we actually look at how much we have spent, as I said earlier, I don't think we have actually been able to get infrastructure to do what is its traditional role in the economy. So we actually have put in money, and well, of course, 60% of it has been located in the state-owned companies, Eskom and Transnet. In the other areas, it has not been catalytic enough, and it is for that reason that our Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission has actually been looking at that, and we have seen significant improvements in the manner in which our infrastructure projects actually are delivered in a manner that begins to crowd in the private sector.
Minister Danisa Baloyi from the Black Business Council and from the energy and the construction space. You touched on the municipalities. We are aware of the fact that Tshwane and Johannesburg are sitting with the capacity that could be enhanced by their power stations. But we know that the tenders have been pushed back over and over again. Wouldn't that help in getting investors to actually make them happen? And we don't know what the crisis is. Why are they not pushed forward? Can you offer an insight on that? But tied to that is that throughout your budget speech, you emphasize the importance of partnerships between government and the private sector. To what extent are we pushing for the unlocking of the capital that is sitting in South Africa before we even talk to the money that is outside South Africa that we can bring, as indicated by Colin earlier, because both could work for us?
Danisa, thanks very much.
Thank you. Municipalities are actually critical areas of investment. It is for that reason that we've said, and we've actually targeted the metros in particular, precisely because of the reason you're making, that the capacity I'm talking about extends far beyond just the capacity to be able to generate energy. And we, working with the Department of Cooperative Governance, we have met with them for the first time. We are planning an important conference where we are going to be inviting the private sector to be part of that conference. If I'm not mistaken, it's scheduled for July. We're working towards that, but we are already getting municipalities to begin to review their budgeting such that it begins to take into account their role in economic development and being engines of growth. We're starting with the metros. We are going to be going to the other municipalities, but we think metros have got that potential, as you have correctly pointed out, on energy. And our chief procurement officer, and that's why we're beginning to look at where there are bottlenecks in terms of procurement. Our Office of the Chief Procurement Officer is beginning to look at all those to see what would be what is the cause of the delays. The National Development Plan is very clear that if we want to reduce the cost of doing business whilst reducing the cost of living for the poor, cost of doing business is not just only in terms of monetary terms, but it's also about those bottlenecks, about delays, about uncertainties, and it is the partnerships also have to do with the certainty, whether when people, I'm told that investment is very allergic to an uncertain environment. It just
I think everybody in this room will tell you over and over again investment is allergic to an uncertain environment.
But certainty also, in order to build an environment of certainty, we also need to build the trust that over the years has actually been, been very fragile. And it's for that reason that we need to find more of these opportunities where we engage, not only when you have convened us, Bronwyn, but also when we just find time to discuss some of those things and find solutions. And that's why the Presidential Working Group on unlocking the bottlenecks in business become critical, so that we can become
Minister, sorry to interject there. Those presidential work groups on unlocking the blockages,
yes,
have they moved beyond the talk? Are they in execution phase?
In fact, they have, because if you look at one of those things that we have looked at through the presidential working groups, because our Director General happens to co-chair one of them, has actually been to look at the visa issues, where some of those applications, if there are cases on the table, there's been interventions with the Department of Home Affairs, and those have been unlocked, and we are able to report back. And we're saying it shouldn't end there. It should go beyond that, because it should act as a case study once we've resolved one, that if this was a problem, what is the actual problem in the whole system. So the partnership has a lot to do, Sister Nisa, with bridging this trust deficit that keeps us away from each other.
So I know you want to put in a question. I just want to, Mr. Kieswetter has signalled he wants to pick up on this conversation. Can I quickly get the mic back to Edward Kieswetter? Thank you so much. And then, sir, I'm coming back to you.
Minister, I think one of the positive statements in the budget was the tax relief for businesses who want to go into some of the township areas. So that was quite bold. I'd like to encourage you to be even bolder in terms of that, because that can transform the lives of those people significantly. So I think I would ask you to go back and sharpen your pencil on the provisions that you've made. I think it's a step in the right direction, but be bolder. The infrastructure-related question I want to ask you is, what would really be sad is if the enabling infrastructure isn't there to facilitate that alongside the tax provision you've made. So, for example, roads, provision of water and services, and all of those other goods could then be on the critical path to facilitating that. So I think brilliant initiative. Really, I was pleased because it brings together the infrastructure, relocation of businesses, and improving the social fibre of society in probably one of the best examples we've seen. So great support for that, but the enabling infrastructure is going to be key.
Yeah. Thanks, Edward. And indeed, it's one of these new measures that we are looking at, because this is untapped opportunities, and there is a potential out there. And if you look at what is currently happening in the townships, you can see that there is the potential. People are hungry and thirsty for economic development, and the enabling infrastructure is part of actually, boosting this economic activity that needs to happen. Because if we move into the townships and there are no roads, traffic lights are not working, and there are no services provided, it pushes the partnership now between the spheres of government also. Municipalities playing their role, making sure that they provide the services required in order to be able to do that, but also putting in place the requisite infrastructure.
Minister, I've got a very frustrated producer in the control room who's saying that the private sector wants to see investment before, or they want to see certainty rather before they go ahead with widespread investment. What would your response be to that?
As I indicated earlier, I think we both need certainty. We also need certainty also that the private sector is going to invest when we do invest. We need to bridge this trust deficit, and if we can do that and then be able to move in. Investment is looking for returns. We are looking for investment in order to actually improve our people's lives, create employment, and grow the economy, because we're waiting patiently to tax a growing economy.
So we all need to leap in. We all need to leap in without waiting for the other party.
Absolutely.
And go on faith.
Yes.
Question from the back there.
It's Alan here. Minister, one of the key questions obviously relates to the capability of the government to manage mega project risk. We know these things are very, very risky. Anywhere else in the world they tend to be, whether it's Crossrail in the UK, the Sydney Opera House was 5,000% over budget. The French British Tunnel went 500% over budget. What is the extent of the South African government's tolerance levels around these budget and cost overruns? That's on the one side. And secondly, what would you say is your level of confidence around the capability itself of managing these particular risks?
Thank you very much. It's one area with municipalities, that's one of the things that we've undertaken to do, is to assist municipalities to build the capacity to manage projects. But government does not do or execute these projects on their own. They execute these projects with with the private sector. There's no construction that takes place without the private sector being involved at the end of the day. But government's role is being able to manage the contracts, manage the project itself. The cost overruns do not only arise out of governments. Maybe it's government's inability to actually hold the private sector to be able, to the requirements and the contracts that have been signed. We're sitting with Medupi that has actually taken this long and this much. Government continues to pay for it. But at the end of the day, it's not only government at play. It's government and the private sector. It's for that reason, again, that I say it takes the partnership to get to, it takes the partnership to work towards the negative that we are in. It's also going to take the partnership between all of us to actually remedy the situation that we are in. Tighten our contract management, make sure that those contracts, CIDB has just indicated that we are alive to some of the challenges that we've been confronted with, but we all need to come to the table. We all need to make sure that we play our role in the interest of South Africa.
As I said before, it's going to be a leap of faith for both parties. So if you'd like to go ahead.
Honourable Minister, thank you very much for coming. My name is Sijibo Miogundele. I'm from Sujimoto Construction, Nigeria. Let me first of all start by congratulating your government and your country for enormous infrastructural development in this country. I think South Africa has played a major role in infrastructural development, which brings me to an irony that we're here talking about infrastructure, about energy, where from Nigeria, one of our major problems, we're still at the back and we're still queuing. So, Honourable Minister, I have 3 questions for you. My first question is that South Africa, as a major partner in the African Union, what are you doing to your sister country like Nigeria? What kind of help are you giving to your sister country like Nigeria to help them in terms of infrastructure, in terms of energy, and in terms of finance? My second question to you, sir, is that I'm sure that South Africa has championed the financial sector and has breached the understanding that very little can happen in Africa by, for example, a bank like FNB becoming the best innovative bank in the whole world, I think a couple of years ago. I congratulate you as the leader of that. What exactly is South Africa and the financial sector doing to help Nigeria to not necessarily become like South Africa, but at least can learn from your leadership? What is South Africa doing in the financial sector to help Nigeria, become more efficient and more innovative in its financial sector? My third question to you, sir, is that when you speak about energy, what is this country doing in terms of alternative measures to improve the energy sector? What are the innovative measures your government is taking to give, not only to depend on what you have now, but what can you do to improve on Plan Bs and more innovative? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. And I think if we start on the third one, because you've got the strategic energy focus within that infrastructure development plan.
Absolutely. But as I said, we also are looking at the other alternative. Our energy mix is very broad, and we also are looking at the other sources of energy, be it solar, be it waste, be it All of those. And this is an area where the private sector has actually been playing a leading role, and the government has worked quite closely with the private sector through IPPs, cogeneration, and all other means. Our wind energy plant in Syria is one of those that Eskom played a leading role, and it is now going to be feeding into the national grid. Financial sector, indeed, firstly, our financial services are actually all over the continent, and as you would know, that we also are in Nigeria in a number of ways. But the financial sector industry is actually quite a complex one, and I think as a country we've done our bit, and we work with a lot of people in the multinational fora to be able to find each other, because we would want a situation where we have some kind of a stable environment in that space because of the interconnectedness of our economies. And if there, because if there is there would arise a crisis in any of our other countries in the continent, we would also be impacted upon. So it's, it's both to protect ourselves, but also to protect the system itself, so that if there are systemic
Minister, before you go to the third one,
yes,
on lending infrastructure to Nigeria, I know that we've only got 5 minutes left with you, and I know there is a burning question there.
Robert Lee from Bowman Gilfillan. Minister, just you made some comments earlier about the war room. Is there any news to report from the war room? And if you're not in a position to answer that, can you maybe encourage the people inside the war room to report? Because I mean, we saw the 5-point plan, we saw the establishment of the war room, but the message has been pretty dark in more ways than one since that happened. And I think part of these initiatives is to establish trust and confidence in institutions. And I mean, I heard with delight this morning that the Medupi number 6 unit was coming on stream, but it sort of came literally out of the blue. And I'd certainly encourage a sort of a
regular updates.
Well, taking not just for business, but just taking the public into your confidence as to what is actually happening, because I think there's a deep level of cynicism out there as to the performance of Eskom at the moment.
Minister, I know we'll make
yes,
this the last question. I know you do
yes,
have to go, so if you can address Robert's question.
Yes, and indeed in Nigeria and in the AU, we actually are involved. It did indicate that in Africa in general, the president is actually the champion of our PIDA program in infrastructure, which actually runs across the continent. It's one of those projects that we think would be quite catalytic and would actually connect the region and the continent at large. But in the war room, if though I'm not mandated to report, but I must say that the reason why the 794 megawatts from Medupi Unit 6 came out as if it comes out of the blue is because we had reached a point where we're saying to Eskom, you are not going to be giving us timelines which you have been missing on a continuous basis. From now on, the only time we will report is when something comes online. We had been told that the testing starts now. It actually started, it was supposed to start in February. It only started now in March. But we are encouraged that at least the reports and our monitoring, close monitoring, is actually beginning to pay dividends. But going beyond that is that this team actually receives these reports directly from Eskom, and one of the things we're trying to do is also to ensure that we are able to go out and know exactly how much of energy is going to be taken out of the system for maintenance. That's one of the outcomes of the war room, to say, tell us exactly how much is coming out of the grid in order for you to execute maintenance, and how much of this are we losing as a result of unplanned outages. And we have found that reducing quite drastically because maintenance has actually taken off quite extensively. Resources have gone into that, and we are also working very hard at making sure that Eskom is in a position now to go out even into the market in order to be able to, so that they can complete the work that they've already started. But I will encourage, I will talk to the Deputy President that out there people want reports from the war room. But I think there was still a lot of work cleaning up, making sure that what goes out to the public is information that is credible, it's information that is in the implementation stage.
Minister, thank you so much. Perhaps we can take that as the key takeaway from today's session is that no communication leaves us all in a black hole.
Yeah.
But if you communicate all the way, as you say, you will address this with the Deputy President. If we could get regular updates from the War Room specifically on Eskom, then we're half the way to building that trust that government and business so desperately need to get that national development plan kick-started. Thank you very much, Minister Nhlanhla Nene. That brings us to the end of this discussion. A special thanks to the Finance Minister of South Africa, Nhlanhla Nene, for his time, and to our business leaders who have joined us in studio today. Until next time, it's goodbye.